Welcome to Creative Moxie,
where Moxie talks.
Hi, and welcome to an education edition of Moxie Talks, where we empower families to make informed decisions about their child's education. So let's get started.
I'm Wendy.
And I'm Lauren. This episode, we're talking about homeschooling. Wendy, you were a homeschool teacher yourself, is that correct?
Yes. I homeschooled my own children through an independent study program, and then later as just our own independent homeschool of one, I should say, because my son had already graduated. But I also taught classes at an independent study charter school.
Sounds like you have a lot of experience.
Yes.
Glad we have you with us today.
But I do not have a teaching credential, just so you know. I have a bachelor's in psychology, and in our state, you can take an exam that basically qualifies you. If you have a bachelor's degree, it'll qualify you to be a substitute teacher. And so I was hired basically as a substitute teacher by our school district at first, and then by this charter school to teach the independent study program. That's all I've ever done. I never went into regular classrooms.
So do you need to have a substitute credential to teach homeschool, or just for those independent
No, that
studies?
was just for the district-run programs.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
You don't need anything to be a homeschooler. You just need to love your children.
Well, what parent doesn't?
Well, don't get me started. There are days. I'm just kidding.
So, Wendy, how did you get into homeschooling?
Okay, so my son, at the beginning of 5th grade, started having panic attacks at school, and they were very severe. And I tried several things, and we tried working with the school, but they weren't very accommodating of his issues. So my husband and I discussed it and decided, you know what, we're just going to have to homeschool him. And so the night before I started homeschooling, I was in the kitchen with my best friend saying, I don't care what happens, I am not homeschooling that child. And the next day we pulled him out of school. Things were bad. He really had some really severe anxiety issues and panic attacks. And so, you know, you have to do what you've got to do for your child. Little did I know that that was going to be the best decision for not only my son, but for my daughter later and for our family as a whole. We're so much closer now.
That's so great to hear. Yeah. So your son was having mental health issues. Is that a common reason that families switch to homeschooling?
I don't know if that's a common reason. Actually, probably not. A lot of the reasons are academic. Either school's going too slow or too fast for the child. Sometimes it's peer issues. You know, they're just not getting along with the kids at school for whatever reason, or they're getting bullied sometimes. So I guess if you want to call that a mental health issue, you can. But there's lots of reasons. We had a lot of actors in our group. Even a few sports people, and some that just parents traveled and wanted them to travel with them and stuff like that. So no, I don't think that mental health would be considered a major reason.
Okay.
That people decide to homeschool.
It does sound like there are a variety of reasons.
Absolutely. Some people who just don't want to have their kids in the school where it's one size fits all education. They want to really accommodate their child's specific strengths and challenges, right?
Absolutely.
So you can go faster in some subjects and slower in others depending on what your child needs. That's probably the biggest reason, I would say.
Interesting. Very interesting. So then you said you switched from public education to homeschool. What did that process look like?
Well, like a lot of people who don't decide to do this before their children start kindergarten, I did it with the idea that he was going to go back to school when he was better. Okay, so whatever that means, better. I was not thinking straight, actually. But so we did school at home. Basically, we did it through an independent study program through the school district. We got the same books as the kids at school. I had the same content standards. I knew what he needed to do, and we worked our way through that way. It didn't take us very long to find out that we could go much faster than his friends that were still in school, as I would talk to the other moms and he would still have play dates with his friends, right? So I joined a homeschool community group and was very lucky. It was a large group and very socially wonderful, just supportive of me and helping me and also helping my children. So I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, so we had that. And I learned very quickly that I didn't need to be doing school at home, that there's a better way to teach children and that I could be teaching to him, not teaching the material at him.
I like that approach of teaching to your student or talking to your student instead of talking at them or teaching at them.
Right. It's more of a conversation, right? And so I started, thankfully, the internet was a thing. It wasn't a thing for very long before I started doing this. So I think I was the first person to ever pull out of an elementary school in our district for homeschooling. So it was a lot of years ago. And 17 or 18 years probably it's been.
Wow.
So, but there was enough stuff on the internet that I could poke around and find. And then talking with the other homeschool parents and the community that I was in was so supportive. And it was all volunteer run. Parents would put together all kinds of field trips and classes, and we would just hire in teachers if there was something specific somebody wanted. So, you didn't have to do them, but if you wanted to, you could join. So anyway, it's nice that you can really tailor the education to the child. That's the best thing, I think, about homeschooling.
That sounds wonderful. I know there's a lot of us out there who do wish that we had our education tailored more to our interests and our needs.
I wish I had. I would have done much better in school.
So, is there any one thing that you wish somebody had told you about homeschooling before you started?
Yes, I wish somebody would have said, forget everything that you know about educating.
Really?
Forget it. Just throw it out the window. Don't worry, your kid's going to be okay. Don't do school at home. It's not school at home. I wish that I would have just let him be for a few months. I wish I would have unschooled him for a long period of time, maybe 6 months, and just let him find himself a little bit more, and then tailored all of his education based on what his likes and strengths were.
Now, you say you wish you would have unschooled your son. What exactly does that mean?
Unschooling is a homeschooling style. There's a lot of different ways people homeschool, and a lot of different kinds of curriculums and things. But unschooling is basically you follow the child. You do not do lesson plans. You don't get a curriculum. You don't have these kinds of things that you're following, scheduled. We're going to do this today and then we're going to do that, or this year we're going to tackle algebra or whatever. Okay. It's more of a, what are my children into? Let's delve deeply into that.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
And then you can teach, the reading and the writing and all that other stuff when the child's ready to learn that. And usually you would use a thematic approach where whatever that child is interested in, you would use that subject to teach other things. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I know that you told me your son had an interest. He had his little army characters.
Yeah. So, for instance, I let him do an entire year of history, social studies on 101st Airborne Division in World War II because he was very, very interested in it. And so we did all kinds of things that year based about that. And he was enrolled in a independent study program. So he had to be turning in language arts projects and math projects and social studies projects and so forth. So what I did was I made all of his essays that he had to write about that topic. And I tried to make as much of his math about that topic. And we, of course, did all of his history projects about that topic. So, and in the end, he did present at a homeschool history fair.
Wow.
We had history fairs in our homeschool group. And so he was able to make a big board, and he kind of did the whole timeline of from the inception of the 101st to now. And it was very interesting. And, he was very excited to do it every day. It wasn't like I was pulling teeth to get him to sit down and do anything. And, we incorporated watching movies into it and documentaries and reading books and learning how to read detailed maps of World War II battle sites and things. And then we also talked a lot about strategies and things like that. So we really delved deeply into the material.
And that was a topic that your son said, I'm excited about this. Let's learn more.
I said, what do you want to study? I want to study this. Okay, let's do it.
Wow.
And you know what? He's a college graduate now, so it didn't ruin him.
No,
just saying. He's a productive citizen.
He actually turned out really great, I can confirm. So it sounds like you had a lot of successes while you were homeschooling your children. But what was the biggest challenge you encountered with homeschooling?
Okay, so there are always days that, somebody's having an emotional. Now, so I homeschooled my children. He was started in 5th grade and he went all the way through 12th grade. My daughter started in 1st grade because she saw him being home and she wanted to be home, and I saw how wonderful it was. And I said, okay, let's do this. So I pulled her out anyway. So realized she went all the way through 12th grade as well, being homeschooled, partly through an independent study program and partly just us on our own. But realized that all those teenage years can be filled with emotional turmoil in your home. You're with your kids all the time, every day. So the hardest part is getting to find that equilibrium in the household where everyone can exist in such a close proximity to each other and respect each other. And then, like I said, then there comes these days that are filled with emotional, pubescent issues, and you just have to roll with it. You have to improvise sometimes during those times. But I would say the hardest part was just finding our equilibrium, finding that balance.
And is that a common challenge for homeschool families?
I think it's easier for the families that knew they wanted to homeschool when their children were younger and didn't even bother going to school, right?
Okay.
Because your household, this, if you're a parent, that when your child is young, a toddler and they're on your hip or whatever, and you just, your house is what your house is and they don't know any different, right? But then you send them off to school for 5 years or 6 years and then they come back and they're like, why do I have to listen to you, your mom, right? So there is that transition period, I would say. And that transition period changes because what I have learned about my children, and from what I hear from my friends, most children, is the minute you finally understand them, they change. So it's a lot of improvisation. It's a lot of keeping your eye on the long-term goal and working your way there as best you can while keeping everybody relatively happy and healthy and sane and but I mean, even if your kids go to school, you have these moments in your home where everything is up in the air. So
Oh, yes.
yeah.
I certainly had my fair share.
But
when I was
the
a teenager.
yeah. Tell me about it. But the flip side of it is that because we were together so much, we are super close compared to any of my friends that had their kids go to school. I know that my children will be a part of my life for the rest of my life, and that I will be a part of theirs. We are friends at this point. We've gone through so much together, and like I said, it's a mutual respect that you have to get to. You can't do it if you're going to be the authority in the household. I'm just going to tell you this is the way it's going to be, and I don't care what you think about it. There's a lot of negotiation and a lot of listening that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's a conversation, not a lecture.
Right. And then that promotes a completely different relationship with the parent and the child. Right? Because most parents aren't necessarily that open to listening to their children. I just heard, we're in quarantine, and I heard a lady on the news, and she was saying they were talking about distance learning and her children being at home and whether they were going to open the schools back and stuff. And she says, well, I hope they open them soon because my kids won't listen to me. And my immediate thought was, well, do you listen to them? Right? I mean, I don't know her. I don't know if she's, but it seemed like she probably didn't by the way she said that. So anyway, so you have to kind of approach it in a different way.
So that was some really great advice for parents about making sure that they're communicating with their child, not just speaking, but also listening.
Listening is the most important part, and active listening, not listening while you're on your cell phone or while you're trying to listen to the news out of the other ear or whatever, right? Active listening, looking them in the eye, nodding your head, not stopping them while they're talking, let them finish. And then if you can, restate what they said, right? So what I'm hearing is, and then you say it, okay? They know you're listening. Exactly. You don't have to do that every single time, no. But on the big issues, it's probably a good idea. Then they feel heard, and that makes everything much better.
So back to just homeschool in general.
Yeah, I was going to say, but that's not necessarily homeschooling. That's just parenting advice.
What does a typical day of homeschool look like, or is there even such a thing?
I don't think there is a typical day. I think it's, as I said, it depends on the household. It depends on the children. We were earlier risers because my husband worked, we live on the West Coast, but he worked East Coast hours. So he was always starting work at 6. So he would get up and leave. So we were up, and we would go to bed kind of earlier because he had to get up, and we didn't want to be making a lot of noise while he was trying to sleep and stuff like that. So we were on the early end. I know many that slept in, which is one of the nice things about it, especially when they become teenagers and they need that extra sleep. Or even when they're young and they need that extra sleep, right? A lot of people everybody's on a different schedule based on whatever their life is doing at that time, right? That is one of the nicest things, is you can schedule things like that. In terms of curriculum, again, everybody uses different things based on what it is they need, how their child learns best, how they need to present that information so the child will remember it, right? What kind of homeschooling they choose to do. There's lots of different curriculum out there. And, so no, there's in answer to your question. No, there's not a typical. I had in our house, if you want to know what our house looked like, I can tell you that.
Yeah, share with us, please.
We got up and we would watch TV while we ate breakfast and kind of got it together. Then the TV would go off, and our rule here was that the TV could not go on again. There was no electronics available to them until after 4:00 in the afternoon. Now, unless it was for school purposes, like if we were watching a documentary or something, or some other kind of personal growth experience that I felt was worth them getting on the computer to do, or watching something or whatever. So that was kind of how we did it here. I always see electronics as tools, and so I used them as tools before 4:00, and then after 4:00, they were entertainment.
Okay. And it sounds like you made that expectation very clear.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody knew the rule. I mean, I was not shy about it. This was my rule because they're a distraction, especially video games for a young boy. That's a distraction. Now, cell phones weren't such a big part of our lives 15 years ago. It wasn't like you had to have it on you. I didn't even use the calendar in mine. I kept a calendar on the wall. Mm-hmm. So, nowadays I don't know how that would work, but yeah, that was kind of how we did it. And because we were in an independent study program, I was given the books from the school, so I didn't have to buy my own curriculums. I did supplement sometimes with some other curriculums. I made a lot of my own, just based on what my kids were doing at the time. And then they gave us the content standards, and we had to address all the content standards during the year. But to be perfectly honest, the idea of a content standard is that it has to be introduced to the child, not that they have to master it. So we would do, a brief an introduction to something. If the child wasn't ready for it or wasn't into it, that was okay. We did our worksheet to show we had done it and they knew what it was or whatever. And then the rest of the month we would do what they wanted to do or what I wanted them to be doing.
That sounds really interesting, building their skills at their level and still obviously touching on those content standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really like that. So, speaking of typical, do you or do your kids feel like they missed out on any of those typical high school experiences?
No, not really. My daughter at one point wanted to go to high school. And so I prepared her for that in terms of her lessons and things. I made sure she was doing everything she needed to do so she could go to high school, at least for her senior year. But by the time she got there, she realized she didn't miss anything and she didn't want to do it. So we had homeschool proms. And anybody who was a teenager at that point could go to the prom. It wasn't just the graduating class because that would be like 7 people. So all the teens would get together every year and do a prom. And she actually had a boyfriend that was in public school and when she was a senior, and they went to his prom, and she said his prom was nothing compared to our proms. Our proms were so much better. So she felt very vindicated in her decision not to go back to the school. Anyway. And
with your homeschooling group, did you guys do a grad night or field trips?
Yep. They get to do the grad nights just like the other seniors, high school seniors. We did field trips all the time. Like I said, I was fortunate to be a part of this wonderful community of people that volunteered their times. Moms would get on a committee. We literally had committees, and moms would get on the committee to the field trip committee, and literally anybody who wanted to go somewhere, you just called them up and you said, hey, do you do school groups? and we would go in as a school group. We would have sign up nights for all the field trips. And yeah.
And how did you find your homeschool community? Or how do you recommend other families find homeschool communities near them?
At the time that I was doing it, I found the homeschool community through my independent study program. They knew of it. Now I would use the internet for sure. I'm sure, if you're in an area, just Google, homeschool community, and the name of your town and or your county, and something will come up. They're all over here. I mean, there's one here for Conejo Valley where I live. There's a Los Angeles County. There's San Fernando Valley. There's a Simi Valley. There's, every area has their own group. Some are larger, some are smaller, but if you're thinking about homeschooling, I would definitely reach out because it's an invaluable source of information. You want to know the best piece of information that I received?
Yes.
When I started homeschooling, there was a woman who was homeschooling, and our boys were friends. And she told me this, and I never forgot it. And I've said this to many, many other homeschoolers along the way. This is a great piece of advice. She said, as a homeschool mom, a lot of people worry that they're not going to be able to teach their kids calculus and stuff, right? And so, oh my gosh, I can't teach them or whatever. This is what she told me. She said, my job is to teach them how to read, how to write, how to do basic math really, really well. How to transmit their information, communicate their information orally and in writing. And anything other than that, they can teach themselves if they need it or want to learn it. So, and you know what? It's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. If they can read, they can write, they know all of their basic math inside and out. Algebra's a breeze. Nobody's freaking out about fractions in algebra and solving for X if you know how to do basic math really well. The people that have problems a lot of the time, I find, with algebra, as I taught it a little bit, is that they don't have those basic math skills. So they freak out because now they're dealing with, oh my gosh, there's an X and I have to worry about a fraction or something. So, think about that though. Reading, writing, math, basic math really well. Orally communicating and communicating in writing their thoughts. And that's it. And so that became my goal early on. And that was what I worked towards. And you know what? I now have a daughter who's in college and she's a geophysics major. Okay, this is a girl that didn't want to do math until 8th grade.
And now she's
done
advanced
all
math.
of the math class the college can offer and all the physics. You just never know because she decided she wanted to learn it. I wouldn't. Look, she started out wanting to be an art major. So, when she was young, she didn't know what she wanted to do. If I'd forced her into calculus, who knows? But she learned it when she decided this is what I want to do. She took the classes and she learned it.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you've worked as an administrator.
Yes.
So, in your role, what were some of the concerns that homeschool families came to you with?
I would say I was like the school office manager. So I worked under a director. So I don't know that that would classify me necessarily as an administrator, but I represented the school. I answered the phones. I did all that, right? So, but the one thing that I did the most when I worked there in that position was counsel parents. I would have parents calling, crying on the phone. You could hear their angst. You could hear how sad they were that their child wasn't going to be able to be in regular school, right? And what did this mean for their child? Was this going to ruin their child's future? What did this mean to them? Were they going to lose their friends? Some people don't. Homeschooling is more accepted now, especially with quarantine, than it has been previously. So, you do lose touch with people when you pull out of school. You're no longer in the PFA and you're no longer on campus doing the fundraisers and the whatevers, right? If you're active, you're not in the classrooms for elementary school helping with reading or whatever you were doing. So you do lose touch as a parent. The children lose touch. My son called them foxhole friends when he came out. And of course, you could tell he was very into World War II at the time. But we call them foxhole friends because they were his friends that he needed when he was at school. Because you need to have friends around you, right? Okay. They are not friends he wanted to be friends with after he was not at school anymore. So they were his foxhole friends. When you're in the line of fire, you make friends with who you got to make friends with to stay alive. And that was kind of how he felt about it. Now, I don't think everybody feels that way about it. He did keep a couple of friends that were nice. And
so when parents did come to you with these concerns about losing friends or, not having those typical school experiences for their kids, how did you address those concerns?
Well, usually they're in crisis mode when they would come to us because we were the independent study school. Their child was not working at the regular public school. So they're grasping at straws to salvage what's happening at that point. And so it's very individualized. It all depends on what the problems were. But mostly I just tried to convince them that everything was going to be okay, that they were not the first parent to go through it. They won't be the last, and that everything's going to turn out okay. You're not ruining your child's life. You can do this, especially if you really want to do it. You can do it. And there are lots of different programs out here and support groups for you to help you through it. So that's basically what I would do.
Now, Wendy, thank you so much for talking with us today. I have one final question for you. What advice do you have for parents who are thinking about homeschooling?
I think if you're thinking about it, you should do it. Because if you're thinking about it, then you're thinking that maybe there's something better for your child than what's going on right now. And I think that you kind of have to take the plunge, and it is a leap of faith, and trust yourself and trust that you won't do anything that's going to hurt your child or ruin their future. You love them too much. You won't let it happen. You won't. So take the leap of faith. I would suggest that you contact the first thing you would need to do is contact your state education department and make sure of what the laws are. So you want to make sure you're legal, and or look at independent study programs around you. If you're not sure you want to go the other route, see what's available to you, and look for a support community, a homeschool community for support and friendship and field trips and dances and everything else social that you might need. But if you're thinking about it, do it. Try it. I think I have met very, very few people that ever regretted homeschooling their kids. That's all we have for today. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or questions about what we talked about.
And let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to address in a future episode. Till next time, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Wendy. Remember, you have the power to affect positive change. Now go, write your own story.